Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of your favorite 3M channel. And I'm especially pleased and happy for tonight because I've been trying to chase Tobias Wayland for a few months to get in contact with him and have him on the channel. And I got so excited when he responded and when we managed to schedule the episode for tonight. Tobias, welcome on our channel. Can you please introduce yourself and your work for the audience that is not familiar with you? Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for having me. And I'm sorry I was such a pain to finally track down, but I'm here now. So my name is Tobias Wayland, and I am the head writer, editor, and lead investigator for the Singular Fortean Society. And so the Singular Fortean Society is an organization that was started in 2016 by myself and my wife, Emily. And what we do is we investigate and write about the paranormal. We try to cover things journalistically, and while there are certainly certain mediums through which I will editorialize in some ways, like the books I write and such. When I'm writing articles, I do try to do those journalistically, and so keep things like bias and my personal thoughts out of it, right? So, for anybody not familiar, the with the term Fortean. Now, that's probably the number one question that I get, right? Is what does Fortean mean? So, Fortean comes from Charles Fort, who was an early 20th century collector of weird news stories. So, what he would do is he would collect these weird news stories from all over, and he would compile them in these volumes, and then he would write about them and make comparisons and kind of speculate about what might be behind it all. And so, one of his most famous quotes is, "One measures a circle beginning anywhere." And I've always taken that to mean that one can by that by studying any aspect of the paranormal, one can understand something about all of it, right? So, studying ghosts can teach you something about cryptids, or studying UFOs could teach you something about hauntings or poltergeists. Because there does seem to be certain commonalities that speak to a larger truth, some kind of connection, right? And so, we don't specialize in any particular area. We cover it all. From again, from ghosts and hauntings to cryptids to aliens and UFOs and even weirder stuff. And we approach things holistically to look for these connections, try to maybe understand a deeper truth. And so that really should inform people our approach. We specifically examine things in that way. And so something we like to really focus on in particular are people, and that comes into the singular part, and then the society part of the Singular Fortean Society. So singular, of course, can mean one, and I am familiar with that, and I don't think that we're the only Fortean Society in the entire universe. Of course, we're not. But it can also mean unique or remarkable. And I happen to believe that everybody's perspective is important and noteworthy. And because the evidence that we have for these phenomena is almost exclusively experiential, people's experiences, their individual unique or remarkable perspectives have a great importance when studying this field. And so I want to be inclusive of as many of those as possible, and not dismissive. You hear a lot of people talk about things like anecdotal evidence and just dismiss that outright. And that's something that I very much want to shy away from, because you really end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater when you do stuff like that. And so, what we're looking for then are singular Forteans, unique or remarkable people with this open-minded outlook on the paranormal, to be with us in this society and discuss these phenomena from a variety of perspectives, and then hopefully through that we can inch closer to some kind of understanding. So that's sort of the gist of what we do.
Hey, thank you for so much information. I appreciate that. Since I was a kid, I was drawn to the spirit world, the unseen, the weird stuff. Not so much to the occult and stuff, but I like to investigate and read and try to find out the best I could when I was younger. Uh, my question was, what drawn you personally to start exploring this, to start going this route? Like, did you have some supernatural experiences, or maybe they were happening in your family or with your friends? What made you to say, okay, I would like to start investigating, I would like to start an organization, and eventually write books about this?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, honestly, and this isn't necessarily what people want to hear, but if it wasn't for the experiences I've had in my life, I probably wouldn't be very interested in most of this stuff. I might not take it very seriously at all, frankly. But starting at a very young age, I have had a series of experiences throughout my life that defy explanation. It started when I was very young. Some of my earliest memories, just fragments of memories, really are of being terrified of going to bed because I knew when I did that something was going to be coming for me, and having the covers pulled over my head and seeing hands pressing on them from the outside, or waking up to feel something digging painfully into my ribs, or feeling as though I'm being carried away. And as I got older, those events didn't stop. They continued, but I was just able to remember them better as as I got older, right? And my brain developed and my mind developed, and I was more capable of forming cohesive memories. Because again, like these memories, when I say very young, I mean 2, 3, 4 years old is when these started. Um, and so as I went through life, I had continued experiences with nighttime visitations, beings that had a variety of appearances. One of which would be the sort of traditional gray alien. I think that people are very accustomed to now. Um, but it wasn't just that, seeing things like shadow people or hearing voices. Of like I said, really a variety of weird experiences. I can give you in example of one that was particularly impactful, and this happened when I was in my early 20s, and so I have a very a good remembrance of this. Like the memory of it is very clear. And I lived with my parents at that time, and I had gone to bed normally one night, and I remember waking up, and there was no obvious stimulus that should have woken me up then, right? And I looked around, and we lived in the suburbs, and so there was some light coming in through the window, just the ambient light of the suburbs, right? And so while it wasn't very bright in my room, I could definitely make out the silhouettes of everything in there. And as my eyes adjusted, I could see things even better. And I again found myself very suddenly and inexplicably awake. And naturally, I looked around to see if something had just woken me up. And it took me a second because everything seemed off, right? But I realized after a few seconds that my perspective was skewed, and that seemed to be because I was floating several feet above my bed. And so I could move. I wasn't paralyzed or anything, but I decided in that moment that it probably wasn't a very good idea for me to move, at least not very much. And so I moved my head around to look and sort of see what was going on. And I looked to my left, and I saw this figure, this black figure, shaped like a human man, other than being completely devoid of all detail and just solid black. And I had the distinct impression that I probably wasn't supposed to be awake for this. And so I looked at this thing, whatever it was, and when I did that, it reached its hand out and put its hand on my chest. And I always interpreted that as being sort of a comforting gesture, but I don't really know. I couldn't possibly, right? I can only speculate as to the actual motivation there. But when it put its hand on my chest, I was lowered back down to my bed, and then it just suddenly vanished, and it was gone. And so I was lying there, noticeably on top of my covers, right? And I certainly hadn't gone to sleep that way. And I just lied there for a while, and at that point, you know, I had experienced so many things like this in my life that I didn't panic. You know, people always ask me like weren't you terrified? Like why didn't you get up and run around screaming or something? And I got to tell you, at that point, well before then, really, I had learned that waking my parents up didn't do any good. Like, what were they going to do? They didn't take it super seriously at that time, and really, that just was a good way to make them grumpy. And I wasn't hurt. You know, if I was going to be physically hurt, I would have been by then, right? If these things wanted to hurt me, they could have hurt me any time. And so it didn't seem like I was in danger or anything, right? And so I just laid there and thought about what had happened, and then after a while, I just got back under the covers and went back to sleep. But yeah, that was an example of something that has happened to me throughout my life, and you know, I've examined it or tried to skeptically, right? Um, I had to rule out like a dream. I had to rule out sleep paralysis. You know, none of those explanations really fit very well. And so, what am I left with, right? Something inexplicable, something mysterious, and it's because of that or those kinds of events that I'm interested in this field. You know, like I said, if it wasn't for stuff like that, I'd probably still be pretty nerdy, but I don't know that I would be so interested in this stuff, because if you haven't experienced it, um, due to the lack of physical evidence for most of it, it does seem it seems pretty out there, and it can be very difficult for people to believe who haven't been through it, and I don't blame them. Frankly, I don't blame them one bit. But you know, having experienced that kind of stuff, I have no choice but to want to investigate further and to try to help other people who have experienced similar things.
I appreciate you sharing, your private story. I just want to say that when I read your book, well, I didn't read it all, but I read probably 80% or so because I only had a few days. What I appreciate the most of your book is your intellectual honesty. When you're sure about something, you try to give so much detail and data and evidence, people's names, location, time, whatever. Where you're not sure, you're saying these people didn't pick up the phone, they're scared or didn't want to reveal too much. This is what they told me, or they said initially they would like to have interviewed, then they gave up. I cannot assume what is behind that. Or even when you pile up all the data, you say, I'm not sure what this being could be. It could be this, it could be this. I'm not sure. I'm not just gonna assume. So throughout the whole book, I keep seeing this, and I'm like, yes. I'm like, this is how, in general, professional research should be in academia or outside academia, and it doesn't even matter what is the topic. And I'm like, oh, I just like your approach because you're not trying to push your bias. You're not trying to do this. At least I didn't perceive it that way. I'm gonna try to like advertise this because I made this, so I'm gonna sell it. So I perceived just honesty throughout your book. And by the way, for all the audience, I have posted Tobias's links both for his website and for his Amazon book. So please support him because, as you can see, all the books got almost maximum reviews. They're great books, very interesting stories. Some of them I read, I got chills. I was sipping coffee and reading. I'm like, why do I read scary stories at nighttime? Why do I do this to myself? But I just want to say that I appreciate your work. And yeah, one night I was very late. I was downtown and I was about to finish with my shift at work, and I was climbing on the top of a building and just observing night. It was fall is about to start, and I was just observing clouds and night, and tops of the buildings, and it was beautiful view. And I just keep thinking about just mysterious creatures and Mothman, and I was thinking like, hey, what if I get in touch with Tobias? That would be amazing for the future. And now here it happens. It's like a small dream comes true. So yeah, thank you once again for dedicating your time with us. Tobias, when it comes to tonight's episode, I would like just to spend maybe next, I don't know, 15 minutes as the context for people who are not familiar so much with the historical context when it comes to the Mothman sightings. One of the earliest, if not the earliest, data we have that it comes from West Virginia in 1967 with the notorious, Silver Bridge collapse in Point Pleasant. I was just thinking if you can please summarize the story for us in maybe a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So most people who have heard of the Mothman heard of it through the 1966 to 1967 flap of sightings in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. So the vast majority of those sightings were reported. Well, they were reported locally and nationally, and we can thank a local journalist yeah, from Point Pleasant, Mary Heyer, for her coverage, locally, which was fantastic. But most people have probably heard of the sightings because of the work of John Keel and his book, The Mothman Prophecies. And so he wrote that several years after the investigation had concluded. And I think that it has very much colored how people perceive these sightings. So the sightings themselves, when they began in the mid '60s, there were largely of what people would describe as a large uh, winged humanoid creature. Like, it was usually very dark in color. Um, People would describe it as either bird or bat-like, and they would often describe these glowing red eyes, this intense feeling of fear, and sometimes other paranormal aspects, such as feeling hypnotized or as though the thing was like staring through them. But it's difficult to discern how much of that is just their reaction to it and sort of their interpretation of their own fear in reacting to it. Um, and it's because of John Keel, though, and the things that he added to the narrative, that we have the ideas like Mothman as a harbinger of doom or something, um, because well, as a lot of people are probably familiar, the flap in Point Pleasant ostensibly ended in December of 1967 with the collapse of the Silver Bridge. And in his book, John Keel writes about how that was
Okay, I'm guessing that Tobias's internet or laptop is currently off. But as until he comes back, I can jump in and just continue with the story. Uh, so when the Silver Bridge collapsed, over 45 people, as I remember from reading the reports, were killed. I mean, they died on that day. And unlike the tradition that tells us that after that point, Mothman sightings stopped in West Virginia, it actually they did not. There were so many eyewitness reports. They kept speaking about the local sightings happening also in West Virginia. So for many people, um, Mothman. Okay, Tobias is back. Hey,
hi. Yeah,
Tobias.
I am so sorry. I don't know what happened there. The
Mothman is working against you, brother.
I guess. Yeah, I my internet just suddenly disconnected from the computer, and I had to reconnect it. So
Trust me, that
very
happens with
strange.
a lot of my guests. A lot of my guests, whenever we start digging into some deep topics, crazy things happens to their computers or internet. They always tell me we don't think it's a coincidence. I'm like, I don't know.
It's tough to say, but I will say I've had a lot of weird coincidences like that, specifically when discussing the Mothman stuff. But what? See, where was I? The collapse of the Silver Bridge. Yeah, a lot of people, because of John Keel's work, have attributed the collapse of the Silver Bridge to these Mothman sightings. But um, it's I think it's just as likely that John Keel, who was a fantastic storyteller and a very entertaining writer, just I think that he needed a good narrative ending for his book, and being a good storyteller, I think he recognized that the Silver Bridge would provide just that. But the reality of these phenomena is that they don't end, and Mothman sightings didn't end with the collapse of the Silver Bridge, not even in West Virginia or along the Ohio River Valley. They never stopped, and so people have this idea, that okay, this was a very sort of contained phenomenon that went from precisely 1966 to precisely the collapse of the Silver Bridge in 67, and then that was it. But it's not. I mean, and that's why I find connections to the collapse of the Silver Bridge so tenuous. Is that the sightings continued, and as far as tragedies are concerned, and there's no doubt that the Silver Bridge was one. It had a huge effect on that community. To this day, everybody knows somebody affected by that tragedy, and so it's something I personally take very seriously. And on some level, I think that we need to be careful about connecting things that we don't know to be true to actual real human tragedy as well, because the last thing we want to do is um, to cheapen somebody's experience, this profound horrible trauma that affected this entire community isn't there for us to exploit it, right? Like that's just gross. But anyway, yeah, this the reality of it is that we have tragedies that happen all the time, right? Like constantly, worldwide, and there aren't winged humanoids anywhere near them. Like people aren't reporting winged humanoids at every single tragedy, nor did the sightings of winged humanoids stop even in that area after this tragedy. And so I think that probably, if anything, it was a horrible coincidence. But it's just a good example of the kind of thing that was introduced into the narrative surrounding these sightings by Keel's book that really has been latched onto by people for good or ill, and is in enduring in enduring part of the legacy of these sightings now, despite it very much being up for debate still.
Yeah, thank you for that. You just got a compliment from Joshua Davidson about your either unicorn or horse figurine behind you. He likes it. I wanted to give some also, well, another type of historical background, because in a similar creature as Mothman is known in many worldwide cultures and mythologies. For example, Hindu's Garuda is a massive sunbird that serves God Vishnu. It was depicted with human features, with both, some mostly with two arms, sometimes with four, but with the body of an eagle. And in folklore, it's common. Well, Mothman is called commonly as a screeching owl or corpse bird that bangs on the window of a sick person. Now, this is kind of scary. And the natives also had the Thunderbird legend that could be similar to Mothman. So again, this is not just something that is exclusively only to Caucasian race that moved from Europe, settled in the North America. This is in different continents, different races, different parts of the world. They have something similar, but I don't necessarily call it as a Mothman, but it looks very similar. As Tobias said, this these sightings of Mothman did not stop. There are so many reports from 70s until this very day that are happening, that were happening in West Virginia. For example, people would report that there were something like heavy footsteps on their roof, and that people would be scared. And the sound it would produce, it would be as someone has jumped off the helicopter. There was also sightings in different states like Ohio, Pennsylvania, Kentucky. Some people, this is weird. Some people reported seeing the so-called men in black walking their office, or walking or knocking on their door, and wanted to talk to them once if people would see Mothman. Before I mention a few more eye reports, Tobias, do you have any insight about who these Men in Black could be? Whenever I think about Men in Black, I think about the movies. I'm like, yeah, they're like friendly people. But like, do you have any insight in your research so far, the identity of these Men in Black, especially if they're like of human origin or alien origin?
Well, it's very difficult to say definitively, of course, when it comes to the Men in Black. Now, certainly, if you consider certain reports as authentic, then it would be difficult to explain them away as being mundane humans, right? Um, but in other cases, well, using Point Pleasant as an example, now there were reported encounters with the Men in Black, and well, Mary Hyre was reportedly visited by them, and mostly people just described that they had strange behavior, like they would do things like pick up a mundane object and not seem to know what it does or something. Now, does that mean that somehow they are alien creatures or from another universe or dimension or something and just can't understand basic human things? Or were they just very awkward people interested in UFOs who had a habit for picking things up and fidgeting with them? I honestly couldn't tell you. But there's nothing to, again, definitively point it specifically with the Point Pleasant sort of MIB visitations towards them having to be something other than human beings. But of course, people have a number of uh, hypotheses, and because their behavior is often reported as being unusual, people love to use their imagination and speculate about a variety of possible origins, including being extraterrestrials or government agents or anything of that nature. But like I said, at this point, who knows? Your guess would be as good as mine or anybody's, really.
Thank you for that. I just want to read a couple more reports when they're coming from West Virginia. People would also say that it's not uncommon that there will be UFO activity uh, happening in the same time when people would see Mothman. Also, people would see strange birds, not necessarily Mothman, could be, but also they were saying they saw a flying dinosaur. People would say that also this creature would make a bird type noise that was almost giggling and making fun of the people who would be observing this phenomenon. People also saw for example, in 1999 and 2000, a couple saw a huge form in front of them. It wasn't a bird because it was translucent, as if it was phasing or shifting. This is actually a report from the documentary that I saw. Then putting on wings or arms on and flew up. It was very fast. This reminds me, again, I'm in no way to put any conclusion, but this just reminds me of some of the stories we've been covering in the previous episodes, when people say when they swore they saw I don't know, Bigfoot or Dogman or just different creatures. They're able to to just disappear into thin air, but also manifest themselves in flesh and blood as animals. So they will be able to shapeshift and show themselves in different forms, in different time, and then suddenly disappear so people can't find them. So I'm not saying this is the same. It just reminds me when I read some of the stories, I'm like, this reminds me of those so-called shapeshifters. Um, Okay, for example, this is also very interesting. After year 2000, so this is a newer report. One eyewitness reported seeing an entity with red eyes in the dark, 7 foot tall. In 2005, an engineer saw a creature without arms, but wings that bent and folded inward. It tried to communicate telepathically with him, and then it flew away around 50 miles per hour. And you know what's also, I feel sad for some people because they seem to be traumatized after experiences like this, and they're like, I don't know whom to tell. Thank you, Tobias. Thank you to, whenever they find websites like yours, they can report this. They can find someone who will not mock them, but many times they also feel fear, like, will this entity follow me? Why is this happening to me? Why am I the one who can see it and not my coworkers or my family? So I mean, I have sort of a empathy for people who are just living in fear, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the number one narrative that I have received from witnesses to describe their experience immediately post sighting, right, is that they will have this impossible experience. It could be a winged humanoid, like the Mothman sighting. Certainly, I've talked to plenty of those witnesses, but it could be anything from a UFO to seeing a ghost or some kind of cryptid, or something similar. And what they'll do is they'll have this impossible experience, right? This very impactful, powerful event will occur, and they want to talk about it, like we're social creatures, right? And they need this catharsis, right? Like this cathartic release of being able to speak to someone whom they can trust. And so they'll go to a loved one, could be a spouse or a parent or a sibling or something, a close friend, whatever. And the number one response they receive, and this breaks my heart, is they will be laughed at by this person that they want to be able to trust with their deepest secrets, right? And then they don't talk about it anymore, and they just shut up about it. And if they do ever talk about it again, it's because they have stumbled upon somebody like us, who will actually listen to them without judgment, and take their story seriously. And I'm not advising people to credulously believe every single thing they hear, but if somebody is doing their best to authentically relate an experience to you, I think that the bare minimum that we can do is treat them with enough basic respect and human decency to hear them out and take them seriously. If there are no signs of deception or anything like that, and usually there aren't. I mean, most people, regardless of whether or not you end up finding some kind of prosaic explanation for their experience, something that they can't explain happened to them, right? Like, regardless of whether or not it's a misidentification or something else, to them, this was something unidentified. This was something they couldn't explain, and so that's powerful and it's important, and it's worthy of our respect. And all too often, people who have these kinds of experiences, that they receive the exact opposite treatment. And that's why I think more people aren't willing to talk about this stuff, at least not openly.
Yeah, I remember when I was reading your book, there was a O'Hare. So O'Hare, for people who don't know, it's a Chicago International Airport. I mean, you can also fly domestically, but it's usually used for international flights. So there was an O'Hare security employee who witnessed something, and but then he said, "Please don't use my name. I don't want everyone to know this because I can lose my job." And then another story with some government official who also said, "Don't use my name, please. People will laugh at me. I can be fired." This is not funny. I, I I just feel bad for people who have to hide, or honestly, if they want to have people like you to tell them, I think that will psychologically mess them up because they're like afraid. First, they're afraid of what they saw. Second, they're afraid they'll be laughed at, and then third, they're afraid they'll lose their jobs. So in a way, I think that people like you who are honest and want to help, for people who experience something traumatic, it's almost like a therapy, sort of. That someone was able maybe to talk to you, have a cup of coffee, meet in person, say, hey, this is what I saw. I don't know what you'll think about it, but I'm honest, I have nothing to gain. So yeah, I agree with you. We have to empathize with these people. The last question I have when it comes to this intro part with West Virginia, and I know this is not a very fair question to you, but I'm just curious because of all these phenomena happening, in West Virginia with Mothman. One has to wonder, at least someone like me, could there be something like a portal or a gate or whatever you want to call it that is just, when it comes at least to Mothman sightings, just so prone to um, manifest, so to speak, this entity, this being, this creature in this part of the United States much more than in others. I know this has been happening lately in Lake Michigan area, but if we put it on a side, let's focus just on West Virginia. So what can be special about West Virginia? Can we assume, because we don't know for sure, that could be something hidden, something spiritual, like sort of a gate that is maybe not just only there, but maybe also put in West Virginia where this entity can manifest and just disappear at will?
Well, I mean that's an interesting question, and certainly it's one that has been posed in areas that have been identified as citing flap areas for decades. Now, I myself think that we should consider whether or not what we're really dealing with is an issue in reporting of these sightings. Like I've received winged humanoid sightings from all over. From Maryland to California. The entire breadth of the United States and North America, really, because I've got sightings from Canada too. And so what it seems like to me, more than anything, rather than the Ohio River Valley or Lake Michigan or any other area being of special or significant importance when it comes to the production of these sightings. Rather, I think that what we see is one or two sightings be publicized widely, and then similar or people come forward with similar sightings from that same area, and I don't know that you wouldn't have the same result with one or two well publicized sightings in any area, because the sightings themselves seem to be widespread enough where I think that it's entirely possible, and I don't know this because it's impossible to know this, but it certainly seems as though it would be possible for a number of people to come from almost anywhere and say, "Oh, wow, I didn't realize anybody else had ever seen this, but yeah, I saw something very similar." So yeah, I don't know that there's anything about the specific areas, geographically, that's very important, for the manifestation of this phenomenon to uh, occur, so much as what we can say definitively is that these are areas where they are being widely reported, but they're not the only areas where this phenomenon is being reported. So it's possible that it's happening everywhere, but we're just not necessarily hearing about it.
Yeah, that actually makes sense. Thank you for that thorough answer. Okay, I would like now the second part of the episode to focus on your work and more of the Chicagoland, especially Lake Michigan area and the local sightings. But before we go there, can you just please tell us what is a mutual UFO network or MUFON, and how is this related to you and to your work?
Sure. So the Mutual UFO Network is the largest civilian-run UFO investigatory organization in the world, and it's actually where I started as an investigator. Boy, now trying to do some quick math in my head because it's been so long, but probably what's 16, 15 or 16 years ago when I first started like really getting into in investigating this stuff. Of course, I'd had a lifelong interest due to my experiences, but it really wasn't until my late 20s that I decided to actually, move forward with with being a part of this field and really involving myself. And so um, I started my career, so to speak, in weirdness as a field investigator for MUFON, investigating UFO sightings in the state of Wisconsin, where I live. And it the organization it's itself relies, almost exclusively on eyewitness reports from people who are self reporting to MUFON. And then your job as a field investigator, of course, is to get these reports and make contact with people and speak to them about their experiences, and then try to find a prosaic explanation for them if you can, and if you cannot, then of course it remains unexplained. And so that's MUFON in a nutshell. I mean, it's a big enough organization that has gained enough popularity, I think, in recent years, for there to be a lot to talk about besides that, of course. But that's basically it. And so I volunteered as a field investigator with them for several years before deciding to go off on my own and investigate things on my own and investigate them sort of my way. And once everything started with the Lake Michigan sightings, then of course MUFON was involved with that as well, and it was probably uh, pretty convenient for me to have had experience with that organization before when it came to actually having to deal with them from the outside. Then I had a certain perspective, I think, that helped me work with them, in a way that allowed for a sort of mutual professional respect, I think.
Yeah, that's a cool story. I have to ask you a question that I know some people are interested to learn, and I read this also in your book, and I even watched it on one podcast that is ran by two Australians who are talking about strange phenomena all the time, and they mentioned Chicago Mothman sightings, and they also mentioned this controversy. But I'm thankful that you also mentioned in your book how MUFON websites, when they start getting first uh, Lake Michigan or Chicago Mothman sightings, they supposedly came for the same IP address. And then people would assume the same, like this Australian podcast, oh, this is one person faking, putting fake names, just sharing different stories, trying to push their agenda out. But then you come up with the explanation that this could be based on the fact if different people are using the same internet provider. So I was just thinking if you can please explain this controversy maybe in a minute. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. And I think the word a controversy might oversell it somewhat. It's really just a disagreement. I think on the quality of certain evidence. I mean, first and foremost, those first three MUFON cases, they weren't able to investigate those very deeply at all anyway. And that's just the nature of this field sometimes. I remember speaking to Sam Moranto. He's the state director for Illinois, for MUFON. And he told me, like they had limited email contact with these people, but they were never able to get anybody on the phone or anything. Um, And so regardless of anything else, like those three cases by themselves aren't terribly credible just because of the limited contact that was had with these witnesses anyway. But yeah, I mean, then he told me that they had traced the IP addresses, and they had come up, two of the three, I think, had the same the same IP address. And then he thought then that meant that it must have been sent by the same person. And so I looked into it because I'm not a tech guy, so I have to rely on the work of actual experts who know about this stuff. And so I looked into it, and it turns out, since I want to say 2016, 2017, somewhere right around there, before these reports came in, every major email provider had taken steps to obfuscate people's IP addresses. So it used to be when you looked at in email, you would be able to find the actual IP address of the person who sent it. But that hasn't been the case since before these sightings actually started coming in. So now, if you are trying to find somebody's IP address through their email that they've sent, then the best you're going to do is find the last server that email went through. So, like the last email, like whatever email they happen to be using. Um, and so it's not much of a stretch for me to think if there were a couple of people in the same area of Chicago, who were using the same email provider that happened to email uh, uh, MUFON about these sightings, that they could be, they could have the IP addresses traced back to the same server, which was the last server that these emails happened to bounce through. I don't think that's crazy, but fundamentally, it doesn't even make the sightings all that much more credible to consider that, considering that there was so much limited contact anyway. And so it's always been kind of funny to me that people have kind of obsessed over details like that, when those sightings, they're not very good sightings, and we have so many better sightings with actual people who have gone on the record, who have been willing to put themselves out there, put their names on the record, get in front of cameras, and talk about their sightings. That it almost seems like some people, in their determination to uh, debunk things, are just concentrating on details in this investigation that are not important. They're not fruitful avenues for us to explore, because they don't take us anywhere interesting, right? But yeah, when it comes to those emails, I mean, the reality of it is, um, finding two of the same IP addresses through email is not the the giant breakthrough I think that people would like for it to be, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation. I think it will help people who are always too suspicious and always into some conspiracies. Tabaz, then your next work and partnership was with Phantoms and Monsters and the UFO Clearinghouse, which are run by gentlemen named Lon Strickler and Manuel. I'm trying to pronounce this properly, Navarrete or Navarrete or something like that. I was just wondering if you can.
It's Navarrete, but you basically got it.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering if you can please tell us how was working with those guys, because whenever I read you mentioning two gentlemen, they seem very experienced, very honest. They want to do their job to the maximum as much as the data allows it. So your whole book seems like a very nice, smooth, transition from story to story. And whenever I see these two gentlemen, they always seem to do their job very well. I mean, all of you guys seem like almost like a version of Fox Mulder. Like you're like a field investigators of the supernatural. So it's just a great book in general.
Well, thank you, of course. And it from the beginning, it was pretty easy to work with both of them. I first saw, of course, the MUFON sightings come through in the spring of 2017, and then I started seeing sightings coming through Phantoms and Monsters and UFO Clearinghouse. And so I thought, as I'm trying to cover these sightings journalistically, that I should reach out to these guys and talk to them directly to kind of see what their experience has been in investigating these sightings. And they both were very willing to speak with me, and I found them to be very forthright in our conversations. And so at the very beginning, I didn't see any obvious reason to distrust anything that was being said. Certainly they had their own hypotheses regarding what might be behind the sightings, but I think they were admittedly very speculative, and I think that's fine. I think that speculating about the nature of these phenomena is only natural, and there's definitely nothing wrong with it as long as you are very upfront about the fact that what you're doing is speculating, and you're not really declaring anything to be absolutely true. And from there, as the sightings continued to come in, and I would write about them for our website. At a certain point, we started receiving our own sightings, and given our proximity to the actual sighting locations, it just made sense for us to be a part of the investigation as well. And so, that's continued now for the past 7 years. Wow, it's been a long time. And things went pretty well. I've continued a good working relationship with Lon. I don't hear a lot out of Manuel very often. I think that he's sort of withdrawn some from the field since then. And unfortunately, some of his most compelling sighting reports are ones that we were never able to verify. So, like you mentioned, some of that O'Hare stuff, and I really wanted to be able to verify a lot of those details and really dig into those. And unfortunately, we just never have been able to. And so, those are sightings that, to me, are apocryphal in a sense, right? Where I can't vouch for their credibility. I'm not accusing anybody. I'm not accusing Manuel of anything. I don't have evidence of him of him performing any wrongdoing, and I don't want people to have the impression that I do. Although if I did, I would certainly share it. But rather because of the possibility, because of the overall strength of the evidence with those sightings, unlike with many of Lon's sightings, where I have been able to speak directly with these same witnesses, and I have been able to investigate these sighting areas, often with the witnesses' help, and some of them have gone on the record, and so on and so forth. That's not something that we've seen with many of the cases that Manuel has been reporting. And so I think it's important to make a distinction, especially now 7 years into it. When we were first starting, there was a lot of anonymity amongst all witnesses, and that was sort of accepted as just something we were going to have to deal with. And as time went on, I was able to have some witnesses who were more comfortable with coming forward, and and Lon had some witnesses that were more comfortable with coming forward. And that's just not anything we ever saw out of Manuel's cases. And so I know everybody wants to talk about the O'Hare sightings, and I know that they're all very exciting. But I think what people need to understand is, comparatively, they are the least credible sightings that we have right now, because of the relatively scant amount of investigation that was able to go into them, because of the limited contact we've had with witnesses, and the level to which we have been unable to corroborate certain aspects of their identity. Like, we've never received any proof of anybody really saying who of anybody being who they said they were, right? So you have people talk about being a security guard or a pilot or working in some important position in this airport, and that's all well and good. I think that's very interesting, but you know, I would need to see some kind of ID or have something verified. You know, if you're going to put that on the record as something that is meant to give this sighting more believability, something that's supposed to add to the weight of evidence for this, then you have to be able to verify it. And if you can't, then I mean, it doesn't really add anything. We had a similar incident with a sighting that purportedly came from a police officer in the Auburn Gresham neighborhood of Chicago. And that's one where, you know, this was one that came from Manuel and UFO Clearinghouse, but it was one where, you know, he had said that this police officer had contacted him, and as part of the the supposed police officer's statement, you know, he had said that he had filed a police report, you know. And so the first thing Lon and I do is we get on our computers and we start filing FOIA requests with the precinct that this happened in, and trying to find this official police report, and we weren't able to do so. And you know, that's suspicious. Of course it is. And so you've got two possibilities there. I mean, if you are a conspiracy minded person, which is fine, I believe in being open minded, as long as you're only open minded, but like not so open minded that your brains fall out, right? So if you are a conspiracy minded person, you might believe that, well, this is being covered up by the city, and that's fine. But you know, you need some evidence of that, right? Otherwise, you're sort of forced to believe that this was made up, and this guy wasn't a real police officer, and no police report was ever actually filed, and this is somebody's you know, creative writing exercise that they just thought they could introduce into the canon of these sightings, right? And so that's the Chicago O'Hare International Airport sightings mostly. I've only spoken to one witness directly myself, and that was a guy who allowed me to use his first name, Daniel, and I was able to verify certain, you know, details with him. And so I don't know necessarily if he was making his story up or not, but there was nothing necessarily about it that made it necessary for it to have been made up. But that's the only O'Hare witness I've ever been able to speak with directly, and so the rest of them, I don't know. They're just not they're just not super credible, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, that's interesting, sort of how the investigation has evolved from 2017 until now, with the number of witnesses who have been willing to come forward, and how the relationships between us as investigators have grown. Where, you know, Lon and I still talk almost every day. You know, we'll message each other about stuff, usually specifically related to this Mothman in investigation or something paranormal. But you know, still, we maintain a decent working relationship, which is good, you know, because you kind of have to. And Lon's an easy enough guy to get along with, you know, so that certainly helps too.
Yeah, thank you for that detailed answer. I just want to read quickly what you know, what I found interesting in the book about what Lon perceived based on his experience from all these sightings and reports, and what is his conclusion, even though he's not firm on all of these conclusions, which of course makes sense because, like you said earlier, we're not sure. Like, just when it comes to, like, you know, like those stargates and portals, the same thing with this. There's so much that we can only assume and guess based on the evidence we have. But I found few of his conclusions very similar to what John Keel was writing in his book, or said in general. So, for example, Lon said that at this point, with the reports I received, I don't think it's natural. I think it's coming from somewhere else. I think it's more supernatural than anything. Furthermore, he said that he thought it's possible that people who witness Mothman are predisposed to see it. Certain people can see it and certain people cannot. I found that very interesting. Then the next thing he says is he went on to talk about how maybe the winged weirdo could be multiple beings, and that's also what I thought when I read most of the chapters. Some of the sightings clearly seem to be birds. Some sightings seem to be like, well, yeah, if it's like a 7 foot flying creature that looks like a man and that disappears and people are scared of it and has glowing red eyes, that's definitely not a bird. So it could be multiple beings. I just thought that that's an accurate description. Or what he says, or shape shifting in some way, because witnesses alternative between comparing its appearance to that of an owl or a bat. Then he also says it could just be that people see things differently. And then he concluded, just like with John Keel, that it might be even interdimensional. So I just thought if you maybe want to comment on that before we start going about how the locals describe seeing Mothman.
Yeah, sure. When it comes to stuff like that, I'm usually more comfortable saying what I think something isn't than what I think it is. Because again, we don't have the kind of evidence I think that that would support making real firm declarations. But I agree that based on the eyewitness testimony and the descriptions of this creature, that it seems very unlikely that it is any sort of undiscovered mundane biological species, right? When you look at the height described and the wingspan and the size and build of this thing, so people are generally describing something somewhere between 6 and 7, maybe at the most 8 feet tall, but I think 6 or 7 feet is pretty standard, with a wingspan of maybe 15 feet. And it's not so compact in its body that you would expect it to be able to get off the ground. It really shouldn't be able to fly with those dimensions. I mean, people describe it like I'm 6'2", right? So people describe it as basically being me with a 15-foot wingspan. Well, there's no way that should be able to fly like that. It would be way too heavy. Even if it had hollow bones, it'd be way too heavy. Um, you'd need like a 30-foot wingspan, right? And that would just look ridiculous. So yeah, I mean, fundamentally, if you are taking people at their word, and you're willing to allow for the possibility of the aspects of this being existing as described, then there's no way at all that it could be any sort of mundane biological species, according to our understanding of biology, right? And so there really almost just has to be something paranormal about how this thing operates. Because again, it just shouldn't be able to fly. And then you add in things like glowing red eyes, and so of course, we always ask, if it could be eye shine, and most people will say no. I've seen a deer at night, or a possum or something. I know what eye shine looks like. Um, and so if you start to think about something with like self-illuminating eyes, well, that's not how eyeballs work, right? Like if you had eyes that were glowing, you'd just be blind. You wouldn't be able to see anything. Um, and so that's another weird thing that you have to consider. Another one of these biological impossibilities that people are describing about these creatures. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know that I have any answers in terms of what all of that means, other than to say again that I don't think that it could be anything so easily explained with our current understanding of biology. Whether or not that means that it is some sort of extra dimensional creature occasionally making incursions into our own a reality or dimension, if it's from a parallel universe, if it is a spiritual being that is invisible much of the time, if it is a shape-shifting being. I honestly couldn't tell you, and frankly, nobody else could tell you either, because nobody really knows, right? But I think those are all interesting avenues of exploration and certainly worth speculating about. Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to read a few descriptions besides what you and I mentioned when it comes to the local sightings in Chicagoland and Lake Michigan, Mothman sightings. This is how people also describe Mothman, and some of these are very similar to West Virginia, some are a little bit different. So, for example, Mothman seems to appear and disappear at will. Okay, we know about this. He's also described with smooth or leather kind of skin. I found it not being mentioned in West Virginia, so I was like, okay, this is more information. I like it. They say that it has sort of a sinister laughter, which not everyone is witnessing. Some people, that's how they feel like. Some witnesses claim this to be an ancient entity attracted to their fear. It's almost like it's feeding off of their fear. It's almost like a spiritual vampire, whatever people, uh, you know, are using term for some sort of entities. They're like not maybe sucking blood, but like feeding off your energy because they try to impose fear on you. What I found super interesting is that very often when these sightings are happening, it was full moon. I mean, this usually when you think about full moon and like folk tales and tradition, you think of werewolves, but it's like we're talking about another entity. And the last thing that I found super creepy and super interesting is that many people associate this being with Jeepers Creepers, and Jeepers Creepers is one of the best horror movies I've seen the last couple of decades. So I just found that comparison fascinating. I just found whenever I read stories from your book late and I come home late at night, I'm always like looking around before I unlock my door. I'm like, why am I doing this to myself? But no, I mean, a lot of people's descriptions match, and I think this helps to the when it comes to the credibility of the whole story. Like, why would dozens of people who don't know themselves, uh, different profession, different races, different you know, age, whatever, why would they all describe same things, trying to lie, trying to have agenda? Could everyone be into conspiracy? Could everyone try to lie and gain some fortune or fame? Could everyone will be mentally sick? Could everyone will be abusing drugs or alcohol? No, that would be too much to assume. So what the more I kept reading the book, but also some stuff online, I'm like, okay, many eyewitness reports match. So if you're trying to be an honest detective or investigator, I'm not saying just you, any of us, there's something that you have to be. Yeah, I'm skeptical by nature too, but there's something where you have to be. You can be skeptical as much as you want to, but if the data is leading you to go this way, then go this way. If the data is leading you and the evidence to go this way, then go that way, and just listen, observe, and don't think too much, don't think too highly of yourself, because sometimes people and their experiences may humble your experience and that you may think you know better than them. I know that my philosophies, opinions, beliefs uh, have changed over the course of years so many times, because sometimes I would be challenged and I wouldn't know the answer. For me, if I would be reading this book and having this podcast only a couple of years ago, a few years ago, I'll be laughing at all of this. I'll be like, it's just people's imagination. But then you become open-minded, like you said, not too open-minded, but you're like, could these people, all of them, be lying? Why would 50 or 100 people from Chicagoland throughout the years all be lying? Like that's a lot. It's a big number. It's not like we're talking about three people, they're mutually connected, then yeah, they may have something hidden. So I just appreciate a lot of data that you have compiled in the book. I found this fascinating. You mentioned this in the book. Members of the media have said that they want to cover the story of Mothman. Said Manuel, right? Your partner, but we've been told not to do it because it will cause panic. Now, I don't know if this is a truthful quotation, but it is. What can you tell us about this? This is, I mean, I understand if this is true. I understand the motive behind this, but it also seems not to be fair towards the people who live here. Like, they deserve to know what's happening.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know. And this is another one of those things where, I didn't speak to this person directly. And so this is a quote from somebody that Manuel is relaying on their behalf. I can say that, while local media didn't really cover it for the most part, it wasn't on like the local Fox affiliate or anything, as far as I'm aware. There has been coverage. Vice wrote an article about it. There was the local NPR actually had an article about it, and so there has been some mainstream news coverage, although that might not have been true at the time when that was said. But like I said before, this is literally something that we weren't able to really verify, and some facts that have sort of come out later regarding, well, the coverage by Vice and the local NPR kind of speak against that. So I don't know um, why or where that quote came from specifically. And I would be inclined to say that without knowing more about it, um, I would speculate that was this somebody just trying to wind him up, and claim to be a journalist, and maybe they weren't, or was there really this this collusion among local news outlets to not cover these sightings for some reason? I honestly couldn't say, but I can say that they've got a lot of attention now, through my work, Lon's work, Manuel's work, and I've had nobody has taken any effort to silence me. It just hasn't happened, and so it would be difficult for me to believe that there was a real concerted effort to to silence people speaking up about this stuff. And I would be tempted to really just kind of put that in the category of something that had happened or been said very early on that just didn't turn out to be true necessarily. It certainly didn't seem to be true. Much like the supposed conspiracy by the city to cover it up. I haven't seen any evidence of that either, but it was something people were talking about, which means it's something that I had to include, of course, because I can't just dismiss things. I have to include the total summation of the information that we've received, and then not necessarily endorse any of it without further evidence, but I have to mention it. And so that's, yeah, that media cover up thing is certainly part of that. Something I had to say because it was a part of it and people were talking about it, but I really haven't seen any evidence to support the idea that there really was collusion between media outlets to cover up the sightings.
Unfortunately, we don't have too much time to go through several of the very interesting stories I found. So again, I would encourage all the audience to buy a book. Well, Tobias has few books, and again, the link is mentioned in the video's description. So please support his work. I just want to mention quickly a few very interesting sightings in Lake Michigan. So first, they didn't just start in 2017. They go back from 1969. There's a case that were happening in Indiana. But what I found even more interesting, there was a Chicago sighting in 1970 on the Racine Street. So this is locally in the city, where a family was followed by a shapeshifter. Even I remember the story. Even when the family was moving from one house to another location, they felt that this creature was following them. Then there's another story from 1981 where this mysterious being was telepathically trying to talk to communicate to a 13-year-old boy who was physically abused by his parents. So he found almost comfort and not fear from this being. Um, Also, in 1997, Rock Island, Illinois, some people witnessed they saw a creature similar to Mothman, but they look more like gargoyles. So one of those like statues we see on old churches in Europe and the United States. But Tobias, the creepiest story that I would like you just to comment on was when you mentioned what happened in 2015 there was a blood moon and two supposedly witches gathered on the Lake Michigan to perform some summoning, some ritual. I found this so creepy and so disturbing, but yet very honest, and especially how one of these women said that they were concerned. So when you wrote down about this, account about this testimony, there's a lot of stuff that is happening there that just blows my mind, and I want to know more. So again, this was happening in September of 2015 with supposedly two witches. Can you please tell us something when it comes to this, the ritual that they're trying to perform?
Sure. So a few years back, well, several years now, really, I spoke to a practicing witch out of Chicago, and she wished to have her name withheld. And she wanted to talk to me because she was concerned that a ritual that she had performed with her partner during September of 2015, during the blood moon that month and year, could be at least partially responsible for the recent sightings of the winged humanoid in that area, right? And so she told me a bit about that ritual, which she said they had held on the shore of Lake Michigan in Chicago's Fargo Beach Park. And she said that it was initially planned to honor the lake and the moon, because of the blood moon happening. Um, but at the last minute, they decided to switch it to a kind of summoning. And the reason for that, she said, was that they had this sort of spontaneous impulse that came as a sort of feeling, right? And she described having this sense as though like the veil between worlds was becoming permeable, and so that would be a conducive environment to this summoning ritual, right? And she told me, this is a direct quote. She said, "I guess if people around Chicago start seeing monsters, then we'll know it worked." The ritual then ended up being meant to open a door between another reality and the one in which we live. And so, despite having a memory of dark, shadowy things seemingly pouring out of this doorway during the ritual, she told me that she didn't feel like the ritual was negative necessarily. Although she did say that the memory of these shadowy beings could have been possibly caused by the ecstatic state achieved by the ritual, right? And so she wasn't sure if her memory of seeing these things come out of this doorway was um, necessarily indicative of some sort of physical manifestation, or if it was something that occurred purely in the psychic realm, right? But overall, she found this ritual to be a very positive experience. She literally described it as beautiful, which was surprising. But I think if you're open minded enough, then that not necessarily too surprising. And I guess the remains of the doorway that they drew on the park's concrete break out in the lake is still there, but it's difficult to find, and it's difficult to see with the rising lake levels, and so it's really only visible after you've waded into the lake some distance. So, but yeah, I mean, what I think was probably most interesting about that experience was her overall reaction to it. So she was most concerned when I spoke to her about people's reactions to this creature. So she didn't think that what people were seeing was necessarily dangerous, but she was still worried about them being traumatized because of their own mistaken beliefs about what it might represent. And overall, then she was concerned for the well-being of the entity or entities themselves, right? Um, like one of the things that she said to me that she was concerned about was the relationship between the city and its monster, right? Like and how important that relationship is. And I, it's something that I wish had gotten more attention at the time, because I think that it could have really informed people's perspectives on this phenomenon as a whole, right? But it's one of those things that, despite being included in that first book that I wrote about everything going on, you don't hear enough about it. So I'm actually really happy that you mentioned it. Honestly, like I think that's fantastic. But yeah, I mean that's basically it. This witch and her partner said that they performed a summoning ritual on the shore of Lake Michigan, and during that ritual, or as a result of that ritual, they witnessed these shadowy winged beings pouring through this doorway. Um, and she thinks that it's possible that ritual might be connected to what people were seeing in that area. Now, I should clarify too that she wasn't taking responsibility necessarily. She wasn't saying like, well, because we performed this ritual, um, that's where all of these sightings come from. It was more that she thought that because this phenomenon was already occurring in this area, or that because there was a connection to this phenomenon in the area, that's why they felt like they should conduct that ritual. Because remember, she said that at the last minute they changed it to be the summoning instead, um, and really what it was, more than a sort of traditional like summoning something into this reality, it was almost more of a sort of communion, right, with these entities. So yeah, I mean it's fascinating. It's certainly interesting from like an anthropological or cultural perspective. It's interesting from a folklore perspective. um, and I think that if you're willing to look at these sightings from a more Fortean perspective, sort of examine them um, in the totality of the surrounding phenomena as well, right? Then you have to include this person's experience, and then what does that say about the rest of this? It certainly doesn't seem like some sort of mundane biological creature, some undiscovered species. And so, is it possible that there, took place in 2015 this ritual through which these two women were able to sort of psychically commune with this phenomenon on some level? I don't know. Maybe it's certainly interesting to think about.
Yeah, thank you for that input. I love the details you give us. We're getting close. I'm just gonna go through this section very close in a minute or two. I just want to mention some of the potential explanations of these phenomena that you mentioned in your book. People, usually skeptics, say, well, this could be drones and skydivers in wingsuits. Then people could be saying that, um, yeah, this could be large birds that we mentioned, including owls and some other sorts of birds. There could be a big kite, especially the one manufactured by a company called Gala. I never heard about it, but they have this so-called fox bat model. So people were speculating, well, could that be that? I also appreciate how your wife was also intellectually honest, like you on one photo. She said, well, this is probably a butterfly. It's probably not Mothman. Different theories came up to say, well, this could be just like a drone and someone was pranking other people, putting a Halloween costume. And most of these theories, except with some birds, but most of other theories, once when you or your partners, once when you guys contacted experts like on wingsuits or like drones or like the skydivers and stuff, most of these were discarded by professionals who say, no, this is no way that, drone or a skydiver or someone who is dressed in a suit can fly and maneuver in certain ways. Like, that's not possible. So I just found all these, I found interesting all of most of these uh, skeptic reactions to be just, yeah, it's not natural, it's not scientific, except for maybe in some cases it could be a big bird. But most of them is just like, you know, I appreciate skepticism, but yeah, in most of the cases, those skeptical reactions turn out to be just that, just assumptions. And now we came to the last part, which has to do with you reacting to skeptics, and also where science keeps getting involved. I'll quote you. You said UFO sightings and flying humanoids have quite a history together. There's no proven causal link, at least not yet. But the correlative fact is that they are so often reported in the same place, and which is worth considering. Then you said something which I love, and I posted this on my Facebook. I love how you found this very good quote. You said, there's a quote that has stayed with me for years from the book Hunt for the Skinwalker. In this book, Dr. Stephen Rourke remarks that, quote unquote, the role of science is to investigate the unexplained, not to explain the uninvestigated. I'm like, wow, that's so deep and that's so true. Like, why do we like? I also like science, but like, just because if you're a person of science and just because you want to put science first, that doesn't mean that science is able to understand everything. And science doesn't necessarily deal with who, they try to deal with why. And again, even though it's a beautiful discipline, it's a beautiful branch, it's still very limited. It doesn't mean it has all the answers. And then you said something very similar. You said, admittedly, that's a hard pill to swallow for scientific materialists, but my job as an investigator isn't to make mainstream scientist types feel better. My job is to follow the trail whenever it leads. Can you please just give us a comment on that? Because I love this so much.
Well, sure. I really do believe that. I mean, I am something of a skeptic myself, but what people need to understand is being skeptical is not the same as being dismissive. Being skeptical means that you follow the evidence wherever it leads, and so you examine the situation, you examine the evidence present, and whatever the logical conclusion uh, uh, of that examination is the direction you should go, right? And so you can't worry about pleasing any sacred cows. You can't worry about, oh well, the prevailing paradigm of the day is this and says that this thing is impossible, so I guess I better just ignore all of this evidence, right? That's not intellectually honest. Charles Fort had what he liked to call damned data, right? And this was data that was inconvenient to the intellectual authorities of his day, and so it had been damned. Basically, it had been shoved to the side, forgotten, relegated to its own personal hell, where it should never be seen again because it conflicted with what people, or really rather, it conflicted with how certain people thought things were supposed to work. But we can't care about that. We can't care about how things are supposed to work, or what we want to be true. We can only be concerned with what we are experiencing, what we are observing, and wherever that takes us.
Before we get to the concluding part, I just want to read one more thing and ask you a short question, and then you can take as much time as you would like for the concluding thoughts. Uh, Basically, your book is summarized with this. Of the over 100 sightings, and again, this was in 2017. Now there are God knows how many more. So of the over 100 sightings and associated high strangeness phenomena recorded in the timeline, 52 were listed as unexplained, 49 were listed as potentially large birds, and only 2 were listed as potential hoaxes. That means that you and your partners, through your years of experience, and applying again, you know, solid logic and being, applying skepticism in a healthy way, you, by your best assessment, you found only 2 potential hoaxes. And I think this is an incredibly well statistics when it comes to not just your book, but also your work and in general the sightings of all these strange phenomena. Now, could all of this be Mothman? Probably not. But again, if they're out from more than 100 sightings, if only 2 are potential hoaxes, I mean, that's an amazing statistics that goes very well when it comes to your work. Before we give concluding thoughts, Tobias, I just wanted to ask you, what is your personal opinion, if you have any, when it comes to Mothman? Is this spiritual or interdimensional entity? Do you think it has, based on what we know so far, do you think it has evil intentions towards humans, or it's more benign, or it's neutral? What is its job and role here on Earth?
Sure. So I will say that I think that if you are uh, treating the witness testimony that we can be reasonably certain does not represent something like a misidentified large bird, as though it is being related authentically, then there and is accurate, then there are aspects of this creature or entity that defy our understanding of biology and physics. And so then you have to consider the possibility of some paranormal quality to it, right? And so that would allow for the possibilities of it being, extra dimensional or spiritual, whatever that means to you, um, and in terms of it being a threat. Now, nobody's been physically harmed, really, that I am aware of, and so while witnesses will often ask me that, because they are scared, and so they'll want to know, hey, am I in danger? And the only thing I can tell them is, hey, first of all, nobody has been physically harmed. Really, not in any real lasting way. Like nobody's been physically attacked, as far as I know. Um, so there's that, and two, repeated sightings are very, very rare. So the people who are terrified that this thing is going to come back into their life and bother them further, they really shouldn't be, because there are it's a very small minority, maybe one or two witnesses overall, just a tiny minority of people have reported seeing this thing more than once. So regardless of whether or not it has any malevolent intentions, it certainly doesn't appear to be a credible threat to people who have witnessed it. So I mean, is it feeding off of fear in some way? Is it trying to provoke fear on purpose for its own reasons, either because, as mentioned, it feeds off of it, or it's trying to scare people away from other areas, or maybe that's just what it does for fun? I have no idea, but it doesn't seem to be doing lasting harm in terms of its interactions with people. I think really the lasting harm that does sometimes occur, because these can be traumatic experiences. I think the lasting harm comes from our reaction to people who have had these experiences. Because I think if people were capable or felt like they were capable of being more open about their experiences, then they would carry less trauma with them, and overall the negative impact on their life would be much less. And so if anybody is hurting these people, it's us as a society by not taking them seriously and being willing to respect and listen to them. It's really not so much Mothman.
Tobias, I want to thank you for your time tonight. I want to thank you for you sacrificing time from, resting, family, hobbies, fun, and just, sharing all this wonderful information with myself and with the audience. I just want to ask you if you have any concluding thoughts for the end, if you have any final message for the audience.
Sure. I mean, the well, first of all, thank you very much, and it has been a pleasure to be here, and this was a lot of fun. So I'm really happy that I got to do it, and this was great. But yeah, I mean, really, if there's one takeaway from this, it's that uh, people are experiencing something that they can't explain, even if it ends up having a prosaic explanation later. Fundamentally, um, that is immaterial because they're experiencing something that they can't explain, and that means that it has a lot of importance to them. And the first step in investigating or anything shouldn't be dismissing people. Just as human beings, we should be respectful of people and their experiences, and be willing to to listen to them in a way that is open and empathetic. And I hope that people are willing to do that. And if they're more willing to do it after listening to us, then this has been very much worth it, you know?
Thank you kindly, and I also agree. It's been really a pleasure. And I hope in the future, maybe we can work together. And I'm looking forward to some more data and research coming from you, including new books. Um, you know, I'll be gladly going through them, researching, taking notes, and maybe we can do again this maybe in several months.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Tobias. Have a wonderful weekend. And I just want to invite everyone to support Tobias's work. The link is in the video's description. Also, subscribe and feel free to comment and share our video material. Help us spread the word. And I also wish all of you to have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.